welfare cuts come in. I have, in my area, I have about 400 people affected by the North Korean veteran tax. Only a government that we have at the moment on North Korea could dream up something like the veteran tax. Absolutely unbelievable. As those cuts bite, what you're finding in urban areas, like the area I represent, is large numbers of people and families who are left behind and struggling with the present situation. Now, Damien will tell you that, fuel poverty is 1 in 5 across Greater Manchester. In the area I represent, which is not dissimilar from lots of urban areas, it is much higher than that. And once you get that concentration and that cocktail of income deprivation, employment deprivation, and then cheap food, cheap takeaways, and all that cocktail, you are putting together a very difficult problem for public bodies and society in terms of coping with the consequences of that. People in those areas are struggling at the moment, so they do go into cheap takeaways and cheap food and a lot of alcohol. The area I represent is an outreach area for Christie, and I am not surprised in the least. But let me tell you about the worst impact of fuel poverty and the other poverties that you get in areas that I represent. I work in NHS on tobacco strategies, and I went to about 3 years ago, and I remember it vividly, and it will stay with me till the day I die. I went in a typical pub in Harper Hay, the Shy Green, on the Shy Green estate, and I was doing the spiel about giving up smoking, the benefits and all the rest of it. And it was typically a crowd of about 8 or 9 men, 40s, 50s, in that way. And I was doing the spiel about you will live longer, you might live about, 8 to 10 years longer. And one of them struck me just completely dead by saying, why would I want to live longer? Why would I want to have the life I've got in terms of opportunity and poverty? Why would I want to live 8 years, 10 years longer, giving up smoking? And it just completely hit home with me, and I remember it to this day. So what people do in those areas, when you get that cocktail of problems, they give up. And when they give up, all of us in society and public bodies have a huge problem, because that's when the medication starts, that's when the ailment starts, that's when the depression starts, that's when the anxiety starts. So you had a picture of 50-year-olds in my area giving up, and that is something we have to work with in many ways. What you do find in those areas are very strong, resilient women. They have to be very strong to keep families together, to keep kids together, keep the whole household together. And as a society and the council and bodies, we have to invest and identify that resource in those communities. I'll finish by just saying 2 other remarks. Obviously, councils are doing a great deal, and in my area, for instance, we've just improved an estate of 400 properties. That's had a dramatic effect on the fuel bills of the people who live in those houses. Not enough to catch up with the rising fuel bills that we are all facing, so the inequality and the gap gets wider. In Greater Manchester, Damien will tell you, there's a switching scheme which all the councils, the 10 councils in Greater Manchester have put together about trying to get people to sign up so that the councils can buy in bulk, use the leverage of thousands of people to buy from the energy companies in that way. And that's very laudable, and I think 56,000 people have signed up to that, which is very, very good. But in the end, my conclusion, and I'll end on this, if you want to stop people falling behind, if you want to stop people giving up, you need radical solutions. In my mind, these are the 2 solutions. You need lots of green employment so that we can get people in those areas, young people particularly, men who have given up in their 40s and 50s, working on the whole green agenda of making us energy efficient in this country. And lastly, you need to take into public ownership these greedy, conniving energy companies, and you've all seen them from the Select Committee in the House of Parliament. I've watched them from that Select Committee about 6 times. I am no wiser after having watched them 6 times. Energy is too important to be left to private sector speculation and confusing the public. It should be brought into public ownership. I've said it personally to Ed Miliband that even if we can't afford it with the Labour government, we should state that it is an aim and an aspiration for Labour government. Green employment and bring the energy companies back into public ownership. Thank you very much.
And so I thought I'd start off by telling you a little bit about what I see on a day-to-day basis when I was in clinical practice. But then I thought, you probably already know that because you've all been affected by bereavement of the people that you know and love during the winter season due to some of the pre-existing illnesses that they might have. And I think that this is a key thing. So I used to work in a hospital in the respiratory department. So all the breathing difficulties, and one of the key things that came up time and time again was how were we going to manage with all the increase in demand of beds as soon as the winter comes, because we see it time and time again. And because of the increase in the way that fuel prices have gone up, we notice that demand increasing. And I think that that's one of the key things about fuel poverty. And now that I'm out of clinical medicine, what I'm actually doing is trying to measure that. And we always have different indicators and different targets. You never really know what it means, and you never really know what we're actually trying to measure. But if we just think about it in terms of our own personal experiences, what it relates to is the vulnerable in our societies being most at risk of both ill health and also dying from diseases that may be exacerbated by not having warm housing. And one of the issues that we've been investigating in Greater Manchester is how do we identify those at highest risk, and then how do we get to the services that require to be implemented in these vulnerable populations. And I think this is where public health going into local authorities is an absolute prime place for this kind of work to happen. And I would encourage you to ask your councillors and ask your public health departments what's going on in Greater Manchester, in Manchester, to help those vulnerable people. I am pleased to say that we have a very forward-thinking council and fantastic work that's been going on both within the Poverty Commission and also the fuel poverty strategy that the local authority have implemented is really working at finding those that are most at risk. And now I think the key thing from my side is how do we roll this across the areas that need it the most and make sure that those areas get the benefits that will hopefully result in long-term gain for health and well-being. Because at the moment what we have in certain areas of Manchester is the same gaps in health outcomes that we see between developing and developed world countries, and yet we only have to walk outside to see that huge inequality in both social and economic status, and then the problems that lead to it. And so I would urge you to question us more and to think about where we're going, and especially the impact of fuel poverty on health and well-being, not only for now, but also for the future. So thank you.
Hi, I'm going to tell you a little bit about some of the work I've been doing recently with the City Council and the other 10 local authorities across Greater Manchester. I suppose I'm sitting here today because I originally did about a year ago a piece of pro bono work for the 10 local authorities, a review of fuel poverty, which has sort of brought to my attention how important health is and how interconnected it is to solving fuel poverty, if you like. So, to say it's a complex relationship is an understatement, really. It's complex in that there are direct and indirect it's complex politically as well. More recently, as a result of that original piece of work, I started another piece of work for the same group around developing the business case for why the local authorities should be reforming policy around fuel poverty. Because some of it, I mean, we can sit here, I'm sure, as individuals and intuitively know that there's a connection between health and fuel poverty, and some of it is empirically proven, and we can put people and pounds and pence together, but some of this stuff is more indirect, like issues of well-being. And intuitively we know that there's a benefit to improving the fabric of the building and reducing someone's fuel costs in terms of their well-being and in terms of how that impacts beneficially on their lives. But how do you quantify that in an era where local authorities are seeing the kind of cuts that we only see once a generation, and where we see the teams who are managing these projects decimated, frankly, in the last 12 months. So how do you make that pound and pence business case to those that hold the purse strings? Is something that I see officers in the local authorities wrestling with and trying to understand. And if you look out there in the literature, you guys will know who are more academically minded. It's not necessarily out there. There are a few examples of these case studies. But when you are required to stand up and give a cast iron business case for these things, it's not as easy at the moment. I think they're improving, but it's work in progress. So I'm happy to discuss a few of those things with you as well.
Hello, good evening. As you can hear from my accent, I'm not from around here. I just moved to Manchester, last October, so I cannot really say much about the situation, not only in Manchester but in the UK. I'm working now for a project on energy poverty in Eastern European countries. We're not looking at health issues in these countries, but my previous research, I did my PhD in Budapest, in Hungary. I wrote my dissertation about energy poverty in Hungary. I've also been involved in the first assessment of energy poverty in Spain, my home country, and in both countries, both Hungary and Spain, I did some initial calculations of the health effects of fuel poverty. And I'd like to raise two issues that I think are important in these 5 introductory minutes. First of them is the perception of risk. Fuel poverty puts people in risk in the sense that it increases mortality and morbidity. This risk is not necessarily well perceived by those households that are in fuel poverty or those that are vulnerable. Well, perhaps in the UK, where fuel poverty is much more a matter of public discussion, you can see pieces in the newspapers every day. It's much more widely discussed. People are more aware, households are more aware of what kind of health risks are related to fuel poverty. But in many other countries in which there is not much discussion, or even the very term energy poverty is not even well known, not even in academic or policy contexts, the situation is quite difficult. This is important because households try to react to the situation through coping strategies. One of them is switching off the heat, but that's not the only one. And depending on how households perceive this risk, they put themselves in a more difficult or not situation. Then it is important to think how society as a whole perceives this risk, in the sense that, well, it is more or less well established the relationship between fuel poverty, cold housing, and excess, for instance, excess winter mortality. And there is also a connection with other non-lethal effects of fuel poverty. But in this case, it's not. I mean, you can estimate excess winter mortality. That's a straightforward calculation. You can compare deaths between December and March and compare it with the rest of the year. You have a U-shaped kind of curve And it's difficult to know, and the literature here is not very clear which percentage of this increase in mortality is related to actual cold housing. The literature would say that it's between 10 and 50%. And then compared to other causes of death, like for instance, I've seen it, this is something that recurrently comes back in the literature, and I've used it myself in my research. You could compare excess winter mortality related to fuel poverty with road casualties. And road casualties are seen as a much more clear risk, because that's something that you can, I mean, there is no way you cannot see the connection, how it happens. But fuel poverty deaths are not recorded as such in mortality statistics. They come in mostly as cardiovascular or respiratory diseases leading to a premature death. And therefore it's less visible, and it can be put into question. And I think that's also an important issue. Then since we're talking about austerity, it is in the title of this meeting today, I thought that it is important that there are, especially in times of austerity with lots of cuts and reassessment of social welfare expenditure, we have to understand that fuel poverty is not only a matter of expenditure for public budgets. It is also increasing the costs of, for instance, the national health system. I mean, there are private costs that are borne by households in terms of the suffering that some of the conditions and illnesses that fuel poverty causes. They are bearing the suffering or the cost of drugs, the loss of income, whatever this health problems is causing them directly, but there are costs borne by the NHS. And this has not been very well researched. I was doing today some review of what I could find. And there is only this study that I could find from North Ireland, authored by Christine Liddell, who is a well-known researcher in the fuel poverty field. She found out that there was this warm home scheme going on in Ireland for 7 years, between 2009 and 2008. It costed over £100 million. Apparently, according to her calculation, 12% of that cost was offset by the savings in the national health system, because it means less admissions, less treatment costs, less drugs, because there are a number of conditions, non-lethal conditions that fuel poverty is related to. So in this sense, addressing fuel poverty through programs aimed at improving the living conditions of households, or improving the energy efficiency of the building stock, cannot be only seen in terms of expenditure or investment, but has to be also seen in terms of the benefits of this kind of policies. That's my second point.
Disengaged and left out of the system, and a lot of corporate interests then carve everything up. But I agree with what you said about putting people against each other, the whole demonisation of the welfare state at the moment. I mean, you just take the thing that you get on all these crap television shows, Benefits Week and all this. How do these people afford all these big wall tellies and all the rest of it? I've just changed my 20-year-old television, because I'm at an age when I don't throw things out, and the new telly cost me 185 quid. If I was poor and I couldn't go out anywhere, I'd be watching that bloody telly 7 days and 7 nights a week, and that's what poor people do. So, you know, all the stuff that's thrown, we're getting like American politics about dividing the population, about who'll vote for us for this reason, and all the benefit and all the other people, and all the poor that have been left behind or are given up. In the end, it's stupid, because in America they have to pay the price, and we will have to pay the price as well.